Hi, welcome to Confessions of a CEO. My name is Carl Swansbury and I'm delighted today to welcome Ian Kinnery onto our podcast. For those of you who have not met Ian Kinnery before, Ian is a very experienced businessman, and over the last 20 years he himself has spent his entire career coaching and mentoring business leaders and owners whom as a consequence have been able to go on to create bigger, more successful, more profitable, scaled businesses. I previously have been coached and mentored by Ian, so I know firsthand the impact of Ian's coaching and mentoring on me and indeed my business. So I'm absolutely delighted to have Ian on our podcast today, and also due to the fact that this is his second ever podcast appearance, I think we're all in for an absolute treat. Ian, just wanted to start by thanking you for joining me on my podcast. Obviously, I've known you for a very long time, not only as a friend, but actually as a mentor to me. So I'm absolutely delighted you were able to join me on this podcast.
Really pleased to be invited, Carl.
Thanks, Ian. And just to, I guess, set the scene for some of our viewers who might not know you, it would be brilliant, Ian, if you could just set out exactly what you now focus in on as a business coach and mentor before we perhaps go right back to where your career started.
Okay, so for the last 18 years, I've been a business coach and a scale-up coach. If you look at my website, it says I grow the business leader to grow the business. It's my belief that Peter Drucker said the bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle, and it's my belief that if you're head of a business or part of the leadership team, chances are that you're the bottleneck in that business. So I grow the business leader or leaders to grow the business.
Really inspiring what you do, Ian. And I want to just sort of ask quite a big question early in the podcast, because as you say, you've spent the last 18 years helping business leaders become better leaders, and as a consequence, build bigger, more profitable, more resilient businesses. So what do you personally get out of helping all of your clients achieve great careers and build big businesses? What's your why now, Ian?
Well, I guess we'll get into this later, but I in my career, I was managing director by the time I was 29. I bought and built my own business, and at some point it got hold of me, and it was really made life very, very difficult. So to answer your question, I get a huge amount of joy seeing people able to do more than they would have done, more safely and with more time to enjoy it. So, you know, I will say that it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on. It is just a gas. I'm only working with good people who want to get better. What more could I ask for?
Yes, well, that's right. And you mentioned there that your career started when you effectively worked for yourself in a motor dealership. Could you just give us an insight into how you went about finding yourself running a motor dealership?
Yeah, well, it started before that, Carl. My dad died when I was 14. He had a family business, or we had a family business, and I'd always assumed I would go into the family business. So there was never a doubt that I'd be running businesses. But after my dad died, my mum tried to keep the business going and basically didn't manage to do that. So by the time I was old enough to go into the business, there was no business there. So I ended up going to university. That led me to the milk round. That led me to, I became a graduate management trainee in the motor industry. And in many ways, I've been really, really fortunate, and I literally fell into something that I just loved. I didn't go into cars, I went into commercial vehicles, and it was brilliant, dealing with real people, real money, real situations, and I was just having a blast. And at some point, and I would never have recognised the word mentor, but I worked for a guy called David Morrow. David was unusual. He was 30-year-old and he was running a big commercial vehicle business in Bristol. And I was sat in his house one night and I thought, this is what I want to do. By the time I'm 30, I want to be running a big commercial vehicle business. So that set my sights, and funnily enough, by 29, I was managing director of a commercial vehicle business, a huge one in Birmingham. And a few years later, I managed to persuade somebody to lend me enough money to buy my own dealership. So that's how I ended up doing it. It was a long journey. It was a tough journey. I've got to say it was a stressful journey, but a huge amount of fun.
And you mentioned, Ian, that sadly your father passed away when you were just a teenager.
Yeah.
And whilst that's devastating in many ways, me knowing you as I do, you'd have decided to take only the positive out of that very upsetting, very traumatic experience. So could you just talk me through, what perhaps you were able to benefit from when it comes to the adversity that you and your family were exposed to when your father did pass?
Yeah, and I don't think I saw the pluses and the minuses. It was just head down, get on with it.
Why is that, and why was that your response? Because of course when people lose people, they can respond in different ways, and as you say, your de facto was head down, socks up. Where did that motivation come from?
I think that's part of my nature. People would say to me at 14, he died just before my 15th birthday, Ian, you're the man of the house now. And I think I literally took on that role. And subconsciously, I'm not saying consciously, but subconsciously, I knew that if whatever happened next was down to me, and as a consequence, the negative of that, the positive of that is that, I did make things happen. The negative of that was that I took on everything. And of course, by the time I was 40, I was done. So I could really have used a mentor at that point to say, hey, just, this is a lifelong journey. Just cool your jets for a minute.
And when you say at 40 you were done, what does that actually mean? I mean, were you physically done, mentally done, emotionally done? What do you mean?
All of them, to be honest with you. I
Okay.
mean, at round about 40, I had a total breakdown.
Did you? God,
If you imagine a computer where the motherboard's gone, that was me.
Wow.
I had a business, I had 70 odd people working for me. I was hospitalised, I came out of hospital, I couldn't remember the names of the people that worked for me.
Wow.
I mean, I was properly done. The good news is I healed, I got better, I came back again. But that's a big part of my why, the stress of running a business, the stress of trying to do everything yourself. Yeah. And Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book that said, what got you here won't get you there. And all of those, I can now see that all of those tactics that stood me in good stead to get me to that position at 40 were actually the barriers that stopped me pivoting and using different tactics.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It does, Ian. And I'd love to just understand a little more about, I guess, what led you to the point where you were done. Because of course these things don't happen overnight, and often it's a number of things compounded over a period of time. Yeah. So in your sort of 38th, 39th year, whilst you were building your business and getting your head count to 70, did you notice that you were becoming more stressed? Did you become aware of the fact that perhaps you couldn't sustain the focus required to continue to build the business, or did this just creep up?
Didn't creep up. It literally hit me like a steam train.
Oh, really?
Absolutely, and we can't really see ourselves as others see us. So we don't notice those changes. It's like putting on weight or developing bad habits.
That's right.
They creep up on us.
So gradual, you don't notice until you've not seen the person for some time and you see it, don't you? And did people see change in you that you hadn't seen for some time? Did people say, Ian, you don't seem yourself, or Ian, you seem short, or not?
No. After that hiatus,
right,
one or two people said, well, I didn't think that you were looking quite yourself.
Really?
Or I noticed you weren't smiling very much. But again, I'm a fairly larger than life character, and that didn't encourage people to be honest with me.
Right.
Which was another problem in retrospect. So nobody was saying, hey, just take a breath. And I remember just before that hiatus, I went to see my doctor about something, and he was a family friend as well. In fact, he was my ex-wife's cousin. And he said, Ian, if you don't slow down, you're going to hit the wall. And of course, being a macho bloke, being a northern bloke, being a blokey bloke, I said, no, I can battle through. I've done it before, I'll do it again. And of course you can, until the moment that you can't.
That's right. And what did your family think of the pace at which you were running, and naturally, the exhaustion and the stress that you were being exposed to and were carrying? I mean, did they not check you?
Well, the problem was by that stage, my mother had died, so I had no close family, and certainly my wife may have mentioned stuff, but probably not in a way that I would hear.
Right, okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does, absolutely. My wife often does something similar, and I don't hear her criticism either, so I respect that. But I guess what I'm really sort of keen to understand is you had lots of people around you at that time, people who loved you, cared for you, had your best interests at heart, yet for some reason either they didn't try and point out to you that you were running fast toward a brick wall, or perhaps you just were never willing to hear
probably a combination of the
feedback
two,
and encouragement you were receiving.
Probably a combination of the two.
Okay. And obviously, what you encountered can only be described as, a life-changing event, and it would be fascinating to understand how you managed to reposition and represent yourself after such a catastrophic line in the sand.
Well, it literally took some healing. I had to be really, really disciplined, and it was difficult because on the one hand I had a business to run, on the other hand I had to look after myself. So it took a couple of years to get back to even moderate mental health, I would say. And after that, it was constantly giving myself time and permission to heal, which for a hard driver was difficult to do.
That's right.
But the good news is I did get through it, and I believe I came out the other side. I'm going to use the word stronger, but that's not the right word. And I couldn't believe when I was really, really ill, I couldn't believe that there'd ever be a silver lining to that cloud. And, I was furious. I was angry at the world. I guess I always was, but I was really focused, furious. And it always makes me smile that a few years later, when I started coaching, that it dawned on me that I couldn't be as effective as a coach had I not had that experience.
Sure.
And that to me is, even now, it's a bit of a miracle. And it feels wrong to say I'm grateful for that experience, but also it feels right to say I'm grateful for that experience.
Sure. No, I appreciate that conundrum, and I think for me, Ian, it's not what happens to you that's important, it's how you respond and the learnings you take. And therefore, whilst it's devastating on one hand that you did find yourself in such a difficult situation and you mentally and physically were done, so to speak, running your business, as you say, there's a lot of significant learnings that you have chose to take away, and therefore people you meant to benefit from, and it's your hindsight and experience that enables you to be such an impactful coach. So as you say, lots of great to come of such a difficult situation.
Yeah.
For sure. And tell me then, Ian, so obviously you were running your own business, and anyone who has a privately owned business knows that it's a lonely place to be, which is probably partly why you found yourself in the predicament
without
you
a doubt.
were in.
Without a doubt.
Talk us through what happened once you dusted yourself down and from a mental health perspective were in a better frame of mind, talk us through how you then picked up the pieces, if you will.
Okay, so again, I was very lucky. I had the opportunity. The major shareholder in the business was Vauxhall. It was a Vauxhall dealership. And I managed to, again, on the spur of the moment, sell my shares back to Vauxhall.
Good.
And get out. Again, for which I'm grateful. And then I spent a few months just really wondering what to do. And then I went back into employment. And I ended up running a dealership that was at least 3 times the size of mine, producing a lot more revenue, a lot more profit, but it wasn't my business.
Yes.
But at least I was able to do that. So I had almost a second career, if you like, working for other people. And you mentioned Peter Vardy. I ran Peter's biggest dealership down in Wolverhampton, which was, I mean, that was stressful. Working for Peter isn't easy, but it was an absolute blast. It was a great time.
And how did you transition from entrepreneur, your own boss, to employee, reporting to a boss? I mean, that's an interesting conundrum. How did that evolve for you?
It is, and for me, I genuinely didn't find it difficult. No. I mean, whatever it is that I've done, throughout my life, I've always taken full and complete responsibility for. You know me, and you know I don't do things by halves. So, you know, it was the same game. I was just playing a slightly different role. In many ways, it was an easier role because I wasn't signing the checks that paid everybody's wages every month. I had a huge amount of support from the Vardy organisation, financially and in terms of running the business. So I've got to say, I really, really enjoyed it. And I didn't compare the two. You know, it was Peter's train set and I respected that. So I had a really, really good time.
And did you ever once sort of wonder how people might perceive your employed role? Because of course, you know, once owner, now employed, people have views, right? And perceptions are so important to some people and can really direct our thinking. So how did you deal with people's perceptions at that time?
I think that's a great question, Carl. And I think one of the things that I had to learn is that what other people think is none of my business. Oh. You know, people are going to have their opinions. I couldn't afford to let that impact me. You know, and that sounds easy to say, it's really difficult to do. But often one of the things that drives us and then one of the things that gets in the way is ego. And that was a big learning for me, because I guess I was always, to a fairly large extent, ego driven. And even now, you know, I take joy. I've just bought obviously spending all that time in the motor industry, people expect me to have a nice car, which I do. But a few months ago, I bought a car, and it's red, it's Italian, and it starts with an F. And people say, you bought a Ferrari? No, I bought a Fiat Panda. And I get such a lot of pleasure. There's so little pressure driving around in the Fiat Panda that it really is a release. Does that make sense?
It does, it does.
So I kind of enjoy that, being able to not worry about impressions or other people.
And is that you now saying, because I do think in business, a lot of people invest too much time in trying to manage perceptions. I mean, is that you saying now, whilst you respect people's opinions, you're completely agnostic as to people's perceptions of you? Is that what you're saying?
No, not completely agnostic, but I'm not as tied up in it as I was.
Sure.
You know, I mean, take for today, for example. Once upon a time, I'd always wear a suit and a tie. Now, less so. But I chose not to come out today in a t-shirt and shorts.
Sure.
I'm wearing long trousers and a jacket because it would be naive, it would be simplistic to think that these things don't matter. Yeah. It's getting them in perspective, and perspective is a huge word, isn't it?
It is, and I think your experience, your learnings, all of the experience you have has allowed you to develop perception, which is relative, and therefore, as you say today, coming dressed as you have done, is appropriate given your diary for the day.
Yeah.
But that's only because you have experience. I guess other people might have made a mistake when applying their judgment if their experience level is more limited.
And also, age helps.
Of course it does.
I'm less bothered about what other people think now. And that's one of the benefits of getting older.
Yes. One thing that one of my good friends often refers to is the fact that his experience has allowed him to become less of a people pleaser. Do you relate to that?
I do, and I think the desire to please, it's like a lot of things, the desire to please people is a good thing, but if it becomes too powerful, it starts to get in the way.
Yes, especially if your desire to please people ultimately is more important than your desire to please you. Yeah, because both are equally important. So obviously, as you say, you had a real great 3-4 years working as an employee within one of Peter Vardy's dealerships down in sunny Wolverhampton. And I think it was in 2004 when you decided to pause. Just talk me through why then you decided to leave the sector that you'd spent years and years in to pursue something very different. What was the catalyst to that?
So slightly longer story than that. I left the Vardy organisation. I was running a massive Ford dealership in Wolverhampton, and I was headhunted to run a very, very similar business in Nottingham, owned by a different group. The Wolverhampton dealership was making between £1 and £2 million a year. The one in Nottingham, from the outside almost exactly the same, was losing £1 or £2 million a year.
Wow.
And I was employed to turn it round. And when I got there, the culture was like chalk and cheese. And a long story cut short, after about 6 months, I knew I could alter the culture, but they say a fish rots from the head, and I went to see the chairman and said, look, I can fix this, but he said, I'm not interested in that, just make money. Mm-hmm. And fundamentally, I came home for Christmas and I thought, I ain't going back. That's, I could do it, but if the guy at the top doesn't want it doing, that's not worth my time. So I resigned, and I was sitting at home wondering what I could do next. I had a house in the Midlands and I had a house up here, and wondering what I should do next. And a friend of mine rang me. He worked for me on at least 2 occasions, and he said, Ian, there's a franchise exhibition in Manchester. Why don't you come with me? And I said, no, it'll all be about taking chewing gum off pavements or cigarette burns out of car seats. That's not me. And he came out with these brilliant words. He said, Ian, you can't work for anybody else. I don't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. Anyway, I went down with him, and of course it was exactly what I expected to see, cigarette burns and chewing gum. And to be honest, I was quite miffed, and he was talking to somebody, and I span on my heel to go and get a coffee, and I tripped, and I fell into an exhibition stand, and I was a good 3 stone heavier than I am now, and I'm a big unit, and going down was a bit embarrassing. So I dusted myself off and started to talk to the people around me to cover my embarrassment. And it turned out that this was a business coaching firm. And I'm thinking to myself, this is bullshit. You can't make money out of this. This is snake oil salesman.
That's right.
And but I made polite conversation because I was embarrassed, and I came away. And about a week later, they sent me some stuff, and it was a company now called Action Coach. And they sent me some stuff, and it was about culture. And I was reading this and I thought, I could have written this with that experience that I'd just gone through. In fact, I should have written this. In fact, with a few more months, I would have written this. And at that point, they had me hooked. And within literally a matter of weeks, I'd bought an Action Coach franchise and I was in Las Vegas training to be a coach. So when I say I fell into coaching, I literally fell into coaching. I wish as a coach I could say, well, I looked at it, I looked at my personality, my strengths, and I came up with the conclusion that I needed to be a coach. It wasn't like that at all. I literally fell into it. So fate's played its hand again, and in a fortuitous way. And I became the fastest starting coach in the world ever with what they term as the world's largest coaching company. So I literally fell into something that A, I was good at, and B, I just loved. And that was 18 years ago, and wow. Here I am now.
Wow. And obviously, over the 18 years that you've been coaching, Ian, you've worked with many great individuals, some challenging, I'm sure, and those individuals have led and continue to lead many great businesses, regionally, nationally, and further afield. It would be fascinating just to understand what you think and what you've learnt to be the biggest obstacle that a CEO owner has to overcome to build a successful business, acknowledging there are many hurdles, but is there one thing that you would say most CEO owners have in common when it comes to obstacles that they have to overcome to succeed?
I really can't answer that question. I go back to what I said before. Marshall Goldsmith said, what gets you here won't get you there. Typically an entrepreneur is somebody who doesn't need to ask for permission. They just make things happen. They just get on with stuff. And that works great for somebody founding a business. But as the business grows, they then need to find a way to work through and with people, which is almost the antithesis to what got them started.
Yes.
So, the one thing that is common is that people need to pivot. What gets us here won't get us there. Now, the pivot will be in many, many different contexts, but I think it's about the ability, the desire, the understanding that I need to change. What's worked so far won't get me to the next level.
And just to spend a little time on that then, so as you say, a typical entrepreneur, if there's such a thing, but the stereotypical entrepreneur will be strong-willed, very focused, dogmatic about what they want to create.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned when you ran your own dealership, perhaps not necessarily willing to take counsel from others.
Yeah.
You are saying slow down, take time out, have a holiday, because of course their vision is non-negotiable, that their willingness to compromise and sacrifice exists. So how do you get someone to be conscientious enough to acknowledge that what got them to where they are won't get them to where they're trying to get to, bearing in mind they aren't listening to you? How do you get them to listen?
Well, what you say is absolutely right. My position puts me in a different position, if that makes sense, because I'm not giving advice. People are paying for my professional, my coaching, my professional opinion. So they are more likely to listen to it because they're paying for it.
Sure.
Yeah. So, and it's really strange. People, it's a bit like a personal trainer at the gym. I went for a massage on Friday and she gave me hell. But because I was paying for it, I was prepared to put up with it. And I know I came out of it better than I went in.
Yes.
And it's similar with my relationship with clients. It's always based on trust. And as that trust builds, that gives me permission to be more and more direct.
Yes.
And you'll know, I'll have been direct with you.
Oh, without doubt.
And when you've asked a great question, because there's just silence.
Yes.
It's a difficult question to answer. And I've got permission to ask some really pretty blunt questions.
You said earlier when you were at the franchise expedition, you fell on literally the stall that was about business coaching, and you sort of dismissed it as a lot of all waffle. For a business owner who's never had a coach before, who thinks that business coaching is a lot of waffle, how can you get them to appreciate how they would benefit from coaching before they've engaged a coach?
Okay, great question, and a big mystery. But what
indeed.
For up until lockdown, I would do free seminars every month or 6 weeks. People would come along, and fundamentally, if they thought I was talking rubbish, they'd listen and go. And if they thought I had something sensible, they'd stick their hand up, and then we'd start to talk.
Right.
Because the short answer to your question is, if they think I'm a snake oil salesman, then they won't want my help and they won't accept my help. So it is about, the question really is, how do you start to build that credibility and trust up?
Yeah, and how do you, I guess, encourage business owners to appreciate that what's gotten them to where they are won't get them to where they want to get to? Because I think we're all proud. I think we're all of the view that perhaps we've got the knowledge, the network, the skills and the ability to achieve everything and anything. But as you're acknowledging,
because that's how we started off.
So it's really interesting, isn't it, to encourage people to think differently, especially if they are wired to be very strong-willed, which is a typical entrepreneur.
Absolutely. So, one of my coaches said to me, and this is a phrase that you'll have heard because I use it a lot, he said, Ian, we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know.
That's right.
And it's always what we don't know that costs us.
Yeah.
So, in part, when I was doing the free seminars, I'm always looking to lift the veil on what somebody might not know. So if I can say something, cause them to look at something in a slightly different way, that's a start. And if looking at something in a slightly different way resonates with the potential client, then that will lead to the next conversation. And that will lead to, and then we start to engage as clients and coach. And that tends to, one of the things I'm really proud of, I don't ever work with a contract with clients. My guarantee is I'll always give you more value than you're paying for. If I don't, that's not happening, you sack me. It's not like joining David Lloyd's where you're in for a year whether you use it or not.
Right.
However, if you're not doing the work, if you're not putting the effort in, I'm going to sack you. So it's based on mutual trust. And I've got to be providing value. And I haven't worked it out for a while, but my average client retention used to be something like 3 years. Now, I believe in the business, the typical engagement is 3 months. So I'm really, really proud of that. And if you think about it, I've got some clients who've been with me for 7 years. And that means that every month they get to think, is Ian giving me value? Is my business growing as a consequence of this? Am I growing as a consequence of this? And for some people, for 7 years, the answer to that has been yes. So I'm really, really proud of that. But what it forces me to do is provide value every time we sit down.
Makes total sense. And let me ask, one thing that I've often wondered is how long you think a coach or a non-exec director on the board of a company or even an advisor can support a management team and or a business without becoming too familiar, too stale. And of course, 7 years demonstrates a real longevity of relationship, which in one way, of course, is a huge testament to your clients wanting to continue to take advice from you because they must benefit from your coaching. But on the other hand, do you become too familiar?
I think that the golden question is, and at some point this has to be asked, at what point can you do without your coach?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, at what point does the impact become negligible?
And you know, the objective isn't for me to secure a client for life. The objective is for me to help individuals and businesses grow so they don't need me.
Almost the opposite.
Absolutely.
So almost the length of relationship, if shortened, demonstrates that you're being an effective coach more so, oddly.
Apart from the fact that the business has been with me 7 years now is vastly different to
Yes.
the one that we started with,
Well, there you
as are the individuals. But it's a little bit like we were talking about Esme, she's 6 now. If in 10 years' time or 14 years' time you're still walking her to school, that calls into question your parenting skills,
That's
doesn't
right.
it?
That's right.
Similarly with me.
Albeit, I must say, with Esme, I probably will walk her to school indefinitely.
Well, that's because
but
you're
that's a
proud,
different story,
proud
Ian.
dad,
That's right. That's me just, exposing my complete inability to let go when it comes to my absolute beautiful daughter. But no, it's a really good analogy you make, because as you say, even though you may have worked with a collection of individuals from a business for 7 years, that team will have evolved. It will
hugely.
have broadened, and I guess the number of people within it will have extended. And naturally, as a business grows, the challenges change.
Yeah.
So that's a really relevant point that you've rightly highlighted, Ian. Thank you for doing that. A lot of owners of businesses who have not built a business before, sometimes I think wouldn't be wrong for being overwhelmed when it comes to the idea of governance and coaching, because there's lots of options in the market, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, an NED, a chairman, a business coach, a mentor, and for some, these can all feel like one in the same thing.
Yeah.
So it would be really fascinating just to maybe try and very succinctly, Ian, set out what the absolute difference is between you as a mentor and a non-exec director who might sit on the board of a company, because they are very different, but some might consider them as one in the same wrongly.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I did. And I thought that over time I'd pivot some of my coaching clients to become so I would become a non-exec director, and I tried that. So I can't give you a definitive answer. I can only tell you what it means for me.
Please.
And I've always, I say always, for the last 15 years, I've always coached 1 or 2 charities pro bono. And I'm working with a charity now, and they asked me to become a trustee. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. Because I believe that there is a difference. And maybe this is just my take on it. As a coach, I've got the client's permission to call them out, to call bullshit on their assumptions and a lot of their comments, and that's a really powerful thing to be able to do. As a trustee or an NED, it's kind of different. I think you only see people generally in a board meeting or a trustees meeting, and you're part of a team. So it's not always appropriate to call people out in the same way.
Do you mean because of the setting you're in, i.e.
In part,
there could be
yeah.
10, 15
Yeah.
people sat around a board
Yeah.
table? Is that what you more mean? Whereas mentoring is often one-on-one, isn't it?
One-on-one, yeah.
Okay.
And coaching coaching, mentoring is unbelievably, when done properly, unbelievably intimate.
Yes.
And that's the only word I can use. So in this instance, I turned down the opportunity to become a trustee because I just felt that at the moment my time is better spent. I'm more effective stood on the outside
Yes.
coaching.
Got it.
And I coach 2 or 3 of the leading leaders in this particular charity.
Right.
And I don't think I'd have the same freedom, the same candour were I a trustee.
Yeah.
That's not to say I won't become a trustee, but at the moment,
Yeah, because you've been trustee of many charities. I think Daisy Chain is probably
chaired it, yes.
the charity that you were trustee for the longest amount of time.
Yeah,
I
and
believe.
I became chair of Daisy Chain.
It's
You know,
a phenomenal charity.
Sorry?
It's a phenomenal charity.
Yeah, and I'm really, really proud of what that charity's achieved. But the relationship as chair or as trustee was different. I started off coaching them, and then it pivoted to trustee, and certainly have no regrets with that, but it is a different relationship.
It's a fascinating differential that you chose to highlight between NXD and someone who is coaching an individual, and I think you effectively referred to it as, you know, when you are a non-exec director or a trustee, because you're in a board environment, it's less possible to call people out in such a direct, no-nonsense fashion, because you have to be political. Whereas I guess if you're sat opposite the founder, CEO, and you are coaching him or her, you know, you can be a bit more direct, because actually you're only running the risk of offending that person confidentially. And fascinatingly, Ian, I must say I've observed too many NED/chairman type candidates trying to become a coach and mentor and failing miserably for that reason. I.e., they aren't willing to be honest, they aren't willing to be professionally direct, and they aren't willing to call shit out. And therefore they become sanguine, they become a little, I think, diluted, and as a consequence add no value. The impact is not felt. So I totally appreciate that nuance. Because it is a nuance, but it's a material nuance at that. And you know, I think I can speak firsthand when I say that, you know, when you were coaching me to become a better leader, to as a consequence build a better business, you know, you were very direct, quite demanding. Sometimes, you know, you gave me feedback that I didn't necessarily fully appreciate at the time, but on reflection, I now see the benefit of. And not many people would be willing to give that type of honest critique. So totally appreciate the difference. So obviously you've now spent just shy of 20 years, can you believe, being a sort of coach/mentor to individuals whom are, as a consequence, running businesses. Therefore, you know, you've seen a lot, you've heard a lot, and you've coached and mentored a lot of individuals. What is it that now keeps you really excited about continuing to mentor people? Because 20 years of mentoring is a long time, and you know, I'm sure many people that you've worked with, you've enjoyed working with, some perhaps less so. What is it now that still on a Monday morning motivates you to want to continue to mentor business owners?
I just get such a lot of pleasure out of seeing people do stuff that they perhaps thought they couldn't do, or to be more effective than they ever thought they could be. And at the moment there are two things that are particularly driving me, Carl. One is the fact that, you know, our relationship with work as a population is probably at its lowest ebb ever. You know, the way we work just isn't working. And yet I believe that the business that's well run benefits everybody. You know, the team enjoy it. The customers enjoy it because the team enjoy it. The stakeholders and shareholders get more out of it when it's well run. So that's one of the things that drives me. There's so many people loathe a Monday morning because it means going into work. And for those people, work's a four-letter word. And it shouldn't be. You know, work, I believe work should be an environment where we go in, we enjoy it, we have fun, and we can play at our best. So that's one of the things that drives me, and I believe by helping leaders become better leaders and businesses become better businesses, I can impact that. And the other thing that's particularly driving me at the minute is mental health. And I you know, from my story, I've always been interested in that. And I although I'm fascinated by businesses and by people, I genuinely believe that by being a leader in a business, if we're not careful, that can be really a dangerous place to be. So the other thing that drives me is I know that if I can help people be better leaders, they are likely to be less impacted by the stresses and strains of running a business. So they're the two things. And here I am. I've been doing this, as you say, for 18 years now. When I wake up on a morning, I'm just buzzed up. Who do I get to work with today? And of course, every time I go on the call, and you've experienced this, my first question is, what sort of a week have you had? And by and large, it's all good news. So it's a bit like mainlining in the feel-good factor.
Absolutely. And let me ask, obviously your experience, perception, perspective, knowledge base now is just so very different to, I guess, the knowledge base and perception and perspective you had, Ian, when you were 35, running your own dealership.
Yeah.
So if you could turn back time, what is the one bit of advice you would give Ian Kinnery when he was 35 years, carrying the weight on his shoulders, trying to build this dealership?
Yeah, great question again. It would be, this is a team game. We either win as a team or we lose as a team. And I think one of the things about myself is when I got under stress, I would become more and more insular, which a lot of people do.
And why is that? Because you're right, a lot of owners do that. But why is that?
Well, I think that for me, that's a stress reaction. And always going back to
So you mean being defensive, controlling the situation?
Building the walls, and going back to when I was 14-year-old, my initial innate reaction was, if it's going to be, it's got to be me.
Yep.
It didn't have to be that way, but that's my reflex reaction. And it's taken a lot of years and a lot of work to realise that there are other options. Yeah. So I would say to anybody, look, this is a team game. First of all, look after your team, then they look after you.
Yeah, really thought-provoking and powerful is that, because as you say, I think a lot of owner-managers do choose to carry the burden.
Well, that's what got them there.
But of course, there is often a bigger, broader, more experienced team around them that want to help, want to take the burden, want to take the weight, but whether we allow them to or not is the challenge that most owners are having to grapple, isn't it? Very conscious that our time together today is running short, Ian. So I just have one final question, if I may. And it goes back to where we started, actually, which is, as a 14-year-old boy losing his father, that's just devastating. I mean, there's no other way about that. And of course, you've got children yourself. Let me ask, what is your legacy that you're trying to leave? Because, we're all doing what we're doing for different reasons, and you've kindly told us a little bit about the things that are important to you now, but what is the legacy that you're wanting to create and in turn leave behind, Ian?
It's fairly straightforward. I think if there's, if I can have impacted anybody's life positively, then that's, for me, is a life well lived. Now, whether that be Emily, my stepdaughter, whether it be you as a friend, or whether it be somebody else as a client, if the fact that they've had an interaction with me can have a beneficial impact, then I'm a happy guy. That's the legacy that I want to leave. Thanks, Ian. Well, on that note, genuinely, thank you. It's been really lovely, actually, to spend some time with you. And likewise. I think a lot of our viewers, Ian, will be able to take a huge amount away from your experience as an owner, as a CEO, and now as a business coach and mentor. So thank you so much, Ian, for your time. Thanks, Carl. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure having Ian Kinnery on our Confessions of a CEO podcast today. I've known Ian for years, both as a friend and as a business coach, but it's been brilliant to actually go right back to where Ian's business career started, to understand more about some of the challenges and adversity Ian faced when he was building his own dealership, to understand a little bit about his mental breakdown and actually the resilience and experience he has been able to take from what was a really difficult, challenging experience. Of course, as a consequence, Ian has gone on to be a very acclaimed business coach and mentor, allowing people to benefit from his hindsight and experience as they themselves go on to build bigger, more resilient, more successful businesses. I'm super grateful to Ian, not only for his time on this podcast, but also for all of the work he does for many charities in the Northeast. He's been trustee of many charities, including Daisy Chain as one example, and for sure, I know that I am joined by you all when I say thank you to Ian for everything he does for the charitable sector in the Northeast. This is only one of our Confessions of a CEO podcasts, and there are many more that you can access on YouTube or indeed any other of our social media channels. We thank you again, Ian Kinnery, for your time and for your insights on this podcast today. And for sure, I look forward to seeing all of our guests on future Confessions of a CEO podcasts.